All right, folks, welcome. Folks are starting to join us. Welcome. You are joining the Community Environmental Council's Beat the Heat webinar. We'll take a few minutes to let folks come in. We would invite you to drop your name into the chat and let us know that you're here.
Buenas tardes, se han unido al seminario web del CEC, Venzamos el Calor. Les invitamos a que escriban su nombre en el chat para saber que nos acompañan.
The lovely voice you are hearing is part of our team, Javi and Naira from Rooted Language Justice. And I'm going to invite them to review with us how to access the Spanish interpretation for this webinar.
Ahora vamos a repasar cómo acceder la interpretación al español para este seminario web. Good evening, folks. I'm going to share this message in Spanish and then I will share it in English. Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Naira. Seré una de las intérpretes esta tarde, hoy con mi colega Javi, de parte de Rooted Language Justice. La justicia del lenguaje es una práctica importante para el CEC y les recordamos que este seminario web será interpretado en inglés y español. La función de interpretación ya está activada. Si está conectado desde una computadora, verá aparecer un globo terráqueo en la parte inferior de la pantalla de Zoom. En un diapositivo móvil va a haber 3 puntitos en la esquina inferior de la pantalla. Puede hacer clic en interpretación de idiomas y seleccionar el idioma que prefiere. Si usted no es bilingüe en inglés y español, debe elegir un canal de idioma. Les pedimos a los oradores que hablen a un paso moderado y que expliquen o deletreen siglas la primera vez que se mencionan. Y finalmente, esperamos que las personas que nos acompañan estarán usando el chat activamente, además de la función de preguntas y respuestas. Así que les pedimos que nos ayuden a traducir lo que compartan utilizando DeepL, que es una herramienta que estamos compartiendo en el chat en este momento para asegurarnos de que sus comentarios y preguntas puedan ser entendidos en ambos idiomas. Cada vez que vayan a escribir algo en el chat o en la función de preguntas y respuestas, por favor tradúzcanlo usando DeepL y peguen su mensaje en ambos idiomas. La traducción automática no es 100% exacta, pero nos ayudará a comunicarnos entre idiomas en este espacio. Gracias y ahora voy a dar el mensaje en inglés. So, good evening, folks. My name is Naira. I am one of your interpreters for this evening, along with my colleague Javi, and we are part of Rooted Language Justice. Language justice is an important practice for CEC, so we remind you that this webinar will be interpreted into English and Spanish. The interpretation feature is now activated, and if you're on a computer, you will see a globe at the bottom of your Zoom window. If you're on a mobile device, you will see 3 dots on the bottom corner of your screen. Click on these and select the language you prefer. If you're not bilingual in both English and Spanish, you must select a language channel. We ask speakers to please speak at a moderate pace and spell out or explain acronyms when they are first mentioned. Finally, as we expect folks joining this webinar to be active in the chat and using the Q&A feature, we ask for your support in making sure your comments and questions can be understood in both languages by translating for yourself using the DeepL tool we are now dropping in the chat. Every time you're about to write something in the chat or Q&A, please translate it using DeepL and paste your message in both languages. Machine translation is not 100% accurate, but it will help us communicate across languages in this space. Thank you, and now we will pass it over to Sigrid, and we may now begin to use the interpretation feature.
Excellent. We're so happy to have you, Rooted Language Justice. Thank you so much. So this webinar is taking place on the Central Coast of California. California is home to 200 tribal nations. CEC is coming to you from Chumash lands, and we acknowledge and honor the original inhabitants of our region. I would invite you to join us in honoring, conducting this land acknowledgement in the chat and letting us know what lands you are coming from. And so with that, a little bit of housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded, and we'll send out a toolkit with the recording, with the slideshow, and any links to resources by early next week. We invite you to add questions to the Q&A during the presentation, and we will answer them as we are able during this webinar and in the Q&A sessions. And please take a moment now, if you would, to locate your Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you have resources to share as we go along, or just general comments, you can use that in the chat, or you can share those in the chat. In addition to the Rooted Language Justice team that you've already met, we have a Community Environmental Council support team here to help us. That includes Jillian and Nicole, who are running the technical side of things, Kristen, who you'll see as a panelist, and Katie, who is monitoring the chat and the Q&A as an attendee, and Dominique, who is supporting as with the Spanish translation. So thank you very much to the CEC team. All right, with that, for those of you who are new to CEC or haven't heard what we've been up to recently, I'm going to share a video in a moment that actor Jeff Bridges recently did for us. And as we get that queue up, we'd love to hear a bit more about you and how you are already taking part in climate action. So we're going to just conduct a short, quick poll. It's going to pop up on your screen. The responses will remain anonymous, and I'm going to read these questions. Do you participate in climate change advocacy? That means, do you write or email your representatives, or testify or march or protest, etc.? So you've got a couple choices there: often, sometimes, never, or not sure. Do you own or lease an electric vehicle? Same thing, yes, no, no, but planning to. Do you take the climate into account when buying groceries and or dining out? Often, sometimes, never. And which future webinar would you be most interested in attending? A topic on how to switch to clean electricity in your life, how to get plastics out of your life, how to advocate for climate smart policies, how to build environmental justice now, or none of these. Your responses help us curate our materials and our webinar topics. So I deeply appreciate you just taking a moment on that quick poll. All right. We're going to play the video now, if we could. Just give this a minute. Yep, thank you.
On the California Central Coast, we are warming at twice the rate of the rest of the continental U.S. Record-breaking droughts, extreme heat, destructive wildfires, and floods threaten all of us. But this climate chaos doesn't impact everyone equally. The hardships disproportionately fall on our most vulnerable neighbors. The Community Environmental Council has a plan. Working shoulder to shoulder with people from all reaches of our community, all races, genders, roles, and jobs, we can build bold, community-led solutions. To change everything, we need everyone. Are you in? Join us at CECSB.org to end climate chaos now.
All right. Well, thanks again to actor Jeff Bridges for helping us put that together. This type of work that we are doing, this climate resilience work on behalf of the community, is made possible because of people like you. So I'm really appreciative. Let's take a look at the poll results and how you shared how you're already engaged in climate work. You can see that our audience often or sometimes participates in climate change advocacy. So it sounds like we have a strong showing with that. And let's see what else we got. We have about 40% who own or lease an electric vehicle, about a third who do not, and the remainder are planning on that. Next question, do you take climate into account when buying your groceries or dining out? I'd say a little over half say often, a little under half say sometimes, and a few folks say never. And which future webinar would you be most interested in? And I won't read all of those results, but that really helps our team, as I said, develop the content for you. So thank you. Thank you again for taking the time on that. All right, at this time, I'm going to turn us over to the content for tonight. I'm going to turn the stage over to Em Johnson. She's our Director of Climate Resilience. M joined the Community Environmental Council last year in 2022 and plays a lead role in enacting CEC's programs that help our community better respond, recover, and adapt to climate change. So with that, Em, I am going to ask you, prior to that, Em served as Executive Director of the Blue Sky Center, where she worked alongside frontline communities to design, plan, and implement community projects aimed to enhance the local socioeconomic resilience in the Kiama Valley. That's in here in Santa Barbara County. So with that, Em, I'm going to hand it over to you and let's get moving. Thank you.
Thank you. And it's an honor to be with all of you today and with this esteemed group of panelists that we'll bring up later. So just getting us started, in the most recent state climate assessment, the Central Coast has identified the top 6 climate impacts, which are heat, drought, water supply, sea level rise, heavy rain events, and wildfire and smoke. So none of these climate impacts should be a surprise to any of us, and yet we don't talk about all of them. So fire, heat, extreme rain events, these may get the headlines, but others on this list are potentially as serious. And these threats interconnect and compound each other. And these threats can also amplify other conditions, such as poverty and the public health crisis. So when we're approaching solutions to address these climate threats, we need to be intersectional as we approach them and in the processes that we develop. Achieving climate resilience on the California Central Coast is a part of an ongoing effort by CEC to identify the most immediate climate threats to this region and prioritize actions that reduce these risks. The plan focuses on Santa Barbara County mainly and evaluates the most pressing climate needs and opportunities, drawing on extensive input from diverse community and government partners and the latest climate science. And most importantly, this action plan reflects what the community is experiencing and calling for at this moment. The priorities and actions lifted up in this report are based largely on what we heard during multiple community roundtable discussions and idea gathering processes that were held between 2019 and 2021. These roundtable sessions provided key insights from residents, workers, public safety agencies, the agricultural sector, as well as community-based organizations throughout the region. Ultimately, achieving climate resilience on the Central Coast demonstrates how collaborative, community-generated solutions can move from ideas to implementation. So when selecting our priorities internally, the CEC elevates solutions that are, 1, community-led, based on what the community is experiencing and calling for. And the solutions need to be intersectional, supporting a broad range of community needs. And lastly, ready to activate, with some type of momentum and local champions behind them already. So let's turn to the problem at hand, extreme heat. Why is this such a critical focal point? First, extreme heat causes more deaths annually than any other climate impact in California and the US at large. Taking a pause here to really sink in that reality that we're facing. To back it up with some of the recent science that's emerged. Since 1895, the annual average air temperatures in California have increased by about 2.5 degrees Fahrenheit. The warming occurred at a faster rate beginning in the 1980s, with 8 of the 10 warmest years on record occurring between 2012 and 2022. 2014 was the warmest year on record. Last year in September 2022, I'm sure most of us can remember this viscerally. The Western United States experienced the most severe heat wave on record, Of all the Western states, California endured the hottest temperatures for the longest time, driving the average statewide temperature to the second warmest year over the last 128 years. With this reality, we also know, and it's widely known, that California chronically undercounts deaths related to extreme heat. When we look at this issue, this is not something in the future or something we're learning from in the past. This is our current reality. And heat waves in California are predicted to become more frequent, longer, and hotter. The preliminary analysis in 2022 during the 2022 September heat wave showed significant excess deaths from all causes during that period. So approximately a 5% increase in the rate of death compared to the rest of the summer in 2022. Excess deaths were seen for heat-specific illnesses as well as cardiovascular, respiratory, endocrine, digestive, and renal diseases. Rates of deaths among persons injured while at work were significantly higher during the heat wave period as well. One of our main goals lifted up in our Achieving Climate Resilience on the Central Coast Action Plan was to really align our climate resilience goals with public health goals. The intensifying climate impacts threaten the health and safety of all Californians. Wildfires, smoke, for instance, worsens air quality and impairs breathing, while extreme heat health risks for those with pre-existing conditions. When we think about the climate justice impacts as they relate to extreme heat, we know that heat impacts vulnerable communities disproportionately than all communities. So who are the communities that are vulnerable to heat? When we think about it, they are persons who are less likely to have air conditioning. They're folks with less shade in their neighborhoods, folks who are less likely to have transportation with or without air conditioning, folks who are more likely to experience language access issues, who are less likely to have a cooling center within safe walking distance, and the youth who are less likely to have air conditioning in schools. So once again, it's very important when we're thinking about climate resilience solutions that we're considering the health of workers as well as people exposed to heat, smoke, and other disasters and the cascading impacts they have on our health and safety. So another top idea that emerged in our Achieving Climate Resilience roundtables were to make sure that the climate planners in our regions engage citizens from all cultures in a way that is meaningful, accessible, and culturally competent. During those roundtables, we heard stories of struggle and resilience as local people dealt with the compounding impacts of climate disaster and the health crisis. From harsh work and living conditions and putting themselves and families at risk in their language during disasters, and feeling unwelcomed and discouraged from accessing beaches and parks, places people need to go to cool down during times of extreme heat. It is so important in all the work that we do at CEC and for all the work that we advocate within the Central Coast region to break down barriers that prevent communities from taking part in the planning efforts, as well as being included in decisions that impact them and their families. When we promote our policy goals, we are asking for both governments and other planners to have meaningful, accessible, and culturally competent engagement processes to engage communities throughout their decision-making. This is a theme you're going to be hearing lifted up throughout this webinar today. So a key we want to drive home here is that extreme heat is experienced by different people in different ways, and the impacts shift. So right now, we're going to pause the webinar and take a moment for each one of you all to share a little bit about how you have experienced heat with a brief yes or no question. So you'll see on the screen the poll pop up. The questions are, have you or someone in your family been impacted by heat in the past year? Do you feel like you have all the resources you need to protect yourself when extreme heat hits? Do you know where to go to cool off during heat events? And do you know where your nearest cooling center is located? Take a moment to respond to the poll and continue to respond in the chat. I just noticed that my internet connection might be spotty, so I'll continue with my video off. So take a moment to respond to the polling. So as we can see from the results of the polls, 57% of our attendees today have been impacted by heat in the past year. Over 50% feel that they have the resources they need. Close to 46% of folks here still do not feel like they have the resources they need to protect themselves when extreme heat hits. 43% of folks here do not know where to go to cool off during events. And an overwhelming majority, 86%, do not know where their nearest cooling center is located. We really appreciate your all's time to really consider the personal impacts of this climate disruption in your life. And we hope that our panelists today can start to illuminate some of these resources as we move along. So now we're going to turn to a speaker who is actively working to ensure people's stories are heard and that action is taken to address their needs. Fabiola Gomez is a dedicated community organizer with the Central Coast Alliance United for a Sustainable Economy, also known as CEC'S, committed to creating a sustainable and just society in Santa Paula, California. Fabiola focuses on environmental justice, renters' rights, and workers' rights. She has led campaigns for a climate resilient school campus and works tirelessly to amplify the voices of marginalized communities and inspire others to take action. Thank you so much, Fabiola, for joining us today.
Thank you, Em, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I am super excited to share with all of you what we have been working on for the past year and on. As Em mentioned, CEC'S is a grassroots organization in California's Central Coast, working for social, economic, and environmental justice. We empower communities through organizing, leadership development, and advocacy, aiming for a sustainable and equitable economy. One of our projects was to gather stories about extreme heat to help educate our communities and leaders about the firsthand experiences of extreme heat. We have a short video to share with all of you of one of these stories, which is part of the larger project that we made possible by CEC'S, Líderes Campesinas, Achieving Resilient Communities, and MICOP. We are grateful for Ofelia Flores' story and thankful that she was able to share this with us.
Mi nombre es Ofelia Flores. Trabajaba en un rancho aquí en Oxnard, California, en La Mora. Un día caluroso, seguridad en el trabajo. Me llamaron que alguien se sentía mal. Ellos sabían que tenía entrenamiento en primeros auxilios. Fui a la cuadrilla que me indicaron y encontré al señor José. Yo lo que hice fue moverlo a la sombra, remojar toallitas de allí con las que se lavan las manos y ponérselas en las axilas para enfriarlo. Le quitamos la sudadera, llamamos al 911 y mandé a alguien para que estuviera en la entrada para que fuera guiando a la ambulancia. El señor se sentía muy mal, no podía soportar el dolor de cabeza y su piel se le puso roja. A mí me asustó un poquito eso. Él decía que se sentía que se le iba la respiración. Me apretó la mano y me dijo, ayúdame, ayúdame, porque yo siento que no voy a aguantar. Le dije, estamos ayudando, aguante y respire lento. Mientras esperábamos la ambulancia, pensé cómo tenemos que cuidarnos más. A veces, por querer hacer una caja más de rendimiento en La Mora, no tomamos suficiente agua, o el agua que provee la compañía no tiene un buen sabor, y eso hace que llevemos nuestra propia agua, y pues como es poquita, se nos acaba pronto. A veces nos aguantamos y cuando vienen esos golpes de calor, ponemos en riesgo nuestra vida y eso fue lo que yo estaba presenciando. Al señor José lo llevaron a un centro médico y tardó 2 semanas en regresar a trabajar. Se había deshidratado. A los días que yo ya supe que el señor estaba bien, me sentí satisfecha que lo pude ayudar. Como vimos que eso pasó, preparamos a las demás cuadrillas para que no pase lo mismo. Estuvimos recordándoles que tienen que tomar suficiente agua y que no esperen hasta sentirse graves y no esperar hasta que el mayordomo grite el break para descansar en la sombra. En el futuro, el cambio climatológico nos va a afectar aún más. Vamos a tener que cuidarnos a nosotros y a nuestros compañeros más que nunca.
Profundo agradecimiento a los participantes del taller y su contribución a nuestra comprensión de los efectos de cambios climáticos sobre la salud en California. Gracias por la cooperación de las siguientes organizaciones y programas: Líderes Campesinas, Proyecto Indígena Mixteca, Alianza de Resiliencia Comunitaria, Causa. Gracias a los siguientes programas del Instituto de Salud Pública, apoyo financiero de Cigna Foundation, American Public Health Association y los Centros para el Control y la Prevención de Enfermedades. Agradecimiento a los Centros para el Control y la Prevención de Enfermedades, el Departamento de Salud Pública del Estado de California y el proyecto de CalBRIS. Esta historia fue producida en un taller facilitado por Story Center.
Thank you again, Ofelia Flores, for sharing your story. Stories like these are happening not only for agricultural workers, but also for groups you may not necessarily think of first when you think of heat. One of these groups is students. I'll be sharing a little bit more about their work and how it's benefiting their community and how they're continuing this work. As the impacts of climate change become more severe, communities like Santa Paula are experiencing the negative effects of erratic weather patterns like extreme heat and destructive storms. There are many affected populations, and one of them being students. Santa Paula students have limited amount of ACs installed in their classrooms. Since the structure of the campus is a very old, the district was limited to install the AC units, although this does not justify the district's lack of action in this matter. We have done many lobby visits with them and talked about their plans to make the campus more climate resilient. Youth wanted to learn a little bit more about the impacts of extreme heat that was causing to different populations. They targeted 3 main populations, which were the farm workers, including outside workers, residents, and students. So they created a survey last year, and they gathered them by classroom presentations, social media, and canvassing, going door to door. Youth and CEC'S staff also collected survey from, like I mentioned, farm workers and construction workers, vendors, and more. On top of that, we collected around 130 surveys from people who didn't fall under either category but lived in Santa Paula. To get these surveys, again, we canvassed, we phone banked, we posted it on social media, mainly through Facebook and Instagram. Youth and staff collected around 80 outside worker surveys and 130 residents. All of these surveys we collected gave us the information we were asking for, which leads us to our next observations. So we found important information which indicated that students were being greatly affected by the heat. On top of the students did not feel comfortable drinking water from campus and often enough felt very limited to their resources. Students are experiencing loss of concentration, physical symptoms, and not drinking water at school. That raised the question of why were they not drinking water and why were they having these symptoms? We found that the majority of students were not able to concentrate during hot days in their classrooms. Many students mentioned that it was because of the heat and that they enjoyed classrooms with AC because they were able to concentrate better. As you can see around from the survey, we got 6.5% of students said that they were able to concentrate compared to 42% of them that were not able to concentrate at all. And this was mainly because of not having an AC in their classroom. Students are experiencing physical symptoms of heat illnesses. Some of these physical symptoms are headaches, dizziness, confusion, nausea, and more. Students reported experiencing many physical symptoms and heat sickness, including like headache, which was 34%, dizziness was like 19%, and confusion was 14%, which was really high. Also, students mentioned that going home was very difficult from being at school. Santa Paula High School doesn't have school buses, and often the students have to walk home, where a large numbers of students indicated that they don't have ACs or functioning ACs at home. Students mentioned that they had to go far distances to like a cooling center, and most of the time they ended up going to libraries, stores, or they had to ask someone to take them 10 to 30 minutes away to go to a park or a beach. One main concern they mentioned was the lack of water they drink in school, and we saw it in the survey. The majority of them would rather prioritize clean and cool water rather than ACs. The AC units are already in plan for the district to finish soon, but not the water hydrations. They mentioned that water made them feel better during hot days, but because the water hydrations were too far, not cold enough, or dirty, prevented them from actually drinking water. we wanted to know what would make them drink more water. And we found that they wanted more water if it was like filter, if it was colder, if it was in the right location because of shade. The students are currently asking the school board to prioritize adding more water hydration stations. And during November last year, we got more feedback from students in which locations they wanted those water hydration stations and shade to be added. This gave us a lot of comprehensive information, and they were also able to talk to the school board members that were present during that meeting. As mentioned before, the students were also concerned with the well-being of residents and outside workers during the extreme heat days. Santa Paula residents were also invited, and they were also able to have a conversation about these extreme heat patterns. And then also the extreme weather patterns, such as the flooding. Other residents attended this workshop, identify streets where they wanted more shade, parks where they wanted more water and shade, and they also indicated and had a conversation about flooding. In the survey, many outside workers, including the warehouse workers, identified not having knowing their rights when it came to extreme heat. There were a high number of people who identified not having enough shade, water, or breaks during extreme heat. We always want to remind workers that workers' rights are human rights. Asking for shade and water is not extra, it's a necessity. So in the future, students, along with CEC'S, want to work closer with farm workers and identify some actions. Lastly, as I mentioned before, the students are asking the school district to prioritize water hydration and more shade in their campus before the beginning of next year, when it usually starts getting really hot. You actually can help us out by clicking the link that it's on this presentation, and it's going to be put in the chat, which will send an email to the school board members and superintendent asking to prioritize the water hydration stations and shade in the Santa Paula High School campus. The link like I said, the link is on the screen, and we're also putting it in the chat. Like I said, this is going to be a one-click email. So it's super easy to do, and you're going to be helping these students that have been working for around a year to make this happen. Thank you so much for having me, and I hope that I gave some information about what's happening here in Santa Paula.
Thank you so much, Fabiola, for really pointing out the frontline impacts of both in our youth and in our outdoor workers when it comes to their experiences with heat, especially for those of us who may live on the coast and who may have access to air conditioning or haven't really experienced heat in the past. It's so important for us to really understand the scope of our geographic region and the differences that different communities within the Central Coast experience extreme heat. And so knowing these stories and being able to really lean into the perspective of our youth is so impactful. So now let's shift our focus to the intersection of heat with other climate impacts and opportunities to build neighborhood resilience. To share about this, I'm happy to introduce my colleague, Jennifer Hernandez. And as it happens, before joining CEC, Jen interned with the organization Fabiola is a part of, CEC'S, working on environmental justice issues in Ventura County and contributing to their work with the Clean Energy 805 Coalition. Jen joined CEC in 2018 and has supported a wide array of initiatives, including clean energy, transportation equity, resilience, and climate justice. She currently directs CEC's Climate Justice Program and serves as one of CEC's representatives in the Central Coast Climate Justice Network. And as a reminder, if you have questions, please drop those into the Q&A section. Just click that Q&A at the bottom of your screen and add your question, and a panelist will either type a response or answer it live later on.
Good evening. Thanks, Em. I'm Jen Hernandez. I use she and they pronouns. As Em said, I direct the Climate Justice Program at Community Environmental Council, and I'm going to share a bit about CEC's response to extreme heat in our region. All right. Extreme heat is very much a regional climate justice issue in that it's already and will continue to be disproportionately affecting communities of color, lower income households, older adults, young children, and outdoor workers. So CEC is approaching extreme heat first and foremost from a standpoint of equity, where vulnerable and frontline communities are prioritized in a comprehensive regional approach. Extreme heat is a particularly deadly climate impact on its own, but also because it exacerbates the impacts of existing climate stressors and other socioeconomic and health burdens. For example, in the Ventura County region, we might think about areas in South Oxnard that experience high levels of diesel pollution from goods movement in neighborhoods where there are schools and agricultural fields that are routinely sprayed with pesticides. And an extreme heat day can intensify the impacts of both those pollutants, to which children and outdoor workers are particularly susceptible. And with multiple stressors taking place, this can greatly increase the vulnerability of people in those areas to both heat-related and respiratory illnesses. COVID-19 also created a compounding effect of extreme heat for many who are particularly vulnerable, such as older adults who have to balance the need to socially distance and to keep cool. And as Em mentioned, many households throughout the county lack air conditioning. And even with the opening of cooling centers, there's a barrier to being able to get to one safely and to be able to avoid exposure to COVID when gathering in one place together. Public safety power shutoffs and blackouts have also presented another layer of impact, even for those who do have AC. And another layer here is that many members of our community speak Spanish and Indigenous languages. So this also means that a comprehensive approach to helping folks understand the risks of extreme heat and being able to respond to them must be based in culturally and linguistically appropriate outreach, messaging, and the use of relevant communication channels that are accessible. So to begin to address this, we can use the tools available to us that present data about the social, economic, health, and environmental burdens our communities face. But as Em shared, we're also defining problems and solutions based on the lived experience of people in our community. And Fabiola's work with impacted youth in Santa Paula is an amazing example of this. Next slide. And it's important in our approach that folks aren't just informed and consulted for input, but engaged in ways that allow them leadership and decision-making power through shared governance or paid community roles, for example. And as local jurisdictions create their own plans to adapt to climate impacts, CEC will support by making sure that community needs are uplifted and integrated into those strategies, and that we're co-designing policies with community that help achieve shared goals while addressing and avoiding the gaps that have created inequitable responses to past climate disasters. Next slide. So CEC has a number of active aligned projects that help communities build resilience to extreme heat and reduce regional carbon impacts. One of the ways that we do that is by bringing the direct benefits of low carbon home energy and transportation to impacted communities in our region. The logos you see here represent some of the programmatic partnerships that we are currently engaged in. All of these programs aim to eliminate financial and other access barriers for lower income households to technologies that reduce energy burdens of both renters and homeowners. And these include connecting community members to financial incentives that make electric vehicles, home electrification, and energy efficiency upgrades more affordable, as well as helping property and business owners in impacted communities install affordable solar and electric vehicle charging stations. And we'll be dropping a couple of links into the chat so that you can connect with our team if you're interested in learning more or participating in some of these programs. Next slide. Another aligned project is the Guadalupe Community Air Project. Through this one, we have worked with our partners at Blue Tomorrow to place 5 air quality sensors in parks and schools in the city of Guadalupe in northern Santa Barbara County to measure air temperature, wind, and pollution. And we've developed a website for the project that reports air quality data in real time. And our goal is to engage people around understanding the impacts of good and bad air quality days, making sure that people know how to protect themselves and their family and neighbors when air quality is bad or compounded by an extreme heat day. And then to develop a community action plan where folks are able to bring their lived experiences and their solutions to the table to guide decisions that affect the Guadalupe community. And we'll also be dropping a link in the chat where you can visit that project website. The last area of aligned work that I'll share about is community resilience hubs. So resilience hubs are community spaces or other existing facilities that on some scale may maintain power during a broader community-wide outage, provide emergency service support during a disruption, or provide ongoing emergency preparedness and community building year-round. So right now we're working with 3 pilot sites in Santa Barbara County to develop resilience hubs at existing community locations. And we're working with a model that we hope will be expanded to other parts of the region. This looks like resilience hubs that are designed and operated by the communities they serve to decide which services should be offered. It's working with local stakeholders like city and county agencies, emergency services, and CBOs to better coordinate and ensure that a plan is in place when disaster hits in any given neighborhood. And it's establishing that recovery and adaptation and thriving in the face of climate impacts over the long term. Next slide. This infographic illustrates some of the services that a resilience hub could provide, such as serving as a cooling center and offering protection on an extreme heat day, serving as a clean air shelter during a wildfire smoke event, providing emergency services like medical aid or serving as an overnight shelter, providing off-grid power when there's a community-wide power outage, providing warmth and shelter from extreme cold, serving as a distribution site for food, water, and other supplies like N95 masks or vaccines. And finally, a hub could provide those ongoing educational training and mutual aid spaces that help communities build relationships and resilience in their neighborhoods. So you might recognize that there are places in your community that already fill some of these roles. But our work is ongoing in this space. And in addition to extending the Resilience Hubs model, we will be working to facilitate building the partnerships needed to capture the generous amounts of funding coming from the state that are dedicated to building resilient responses to extreme heat in the most impacted regions in our community or our counties. Okay, next slide. Thanks. So what can each of us do now in our communities to help prepare for and protect each other from the impacts of extreme heat in our region? Being prepared looks like staying aware of weather forecasts and knowing where to go in your community to get cool. Also being aware of where to find emergency information when hot days are predicted will help ensure that you will know when and where additional cooling centers might be opening in your community. Keeping your own home cool by covering windows, weather stripping, using window reflectors are also important. And last, having a plan in place when possible with family and friends to support minimizing the impacts of heat. You can look to the chat as well for links to state and local extreme heat resources that include all of the information that's being shared here today. During extreme heat days, you can prevent heat illness by using the buddy system, checking in on your friends or neighbors and having somebody do the same for you. By staying hydrated, don't wait till you're thirsty, drink plenty of liquids throughout the day. Stay in air-conditioned buildings as much as possible. And if your home doesn't have air conditioning, use the guidance mentioned to locate the cooling centers in your community. Electric fans do provide comfort, but when the temperature is in the high 90s or above, fans will not prevent heat-related illness. Wear loose, lightweight, and light-colored clothing. Shower or bathe in cool water frequently, and try not to engage in strenuous activities. And ultimately, you should be aware of the signs of heat stroke and call 911 or get to a hospital immediately if you or someone you know has warning signs and symptoms, such as a high body temperature of 103 degrees or more, red, hot, and dry skin with no sweat, rapid, strong pulse, dizziness, confusion, or unconsciousness. And last, for outdoor workers in our region, California employers are required to take these 4 steps to prevent heat illness on the job. Training for all employees and supervisors about heat illness prevention, providing enough fresh water so that each employee can drink at least 1 quart per hour, which is 4 8-ounce glasses of water per hour, and also encouraging them to do so. They should provide access to shade and encourage employees to take a cool down rest for at least 5 minutes. And last, they need to develop and implement written procedures for complying with the Cal OSHA heat illness prevention standard. And hopefully these resources help you prepare for the season ahead. As we know, as Em spoke to, extreme heat is already being experienced widely in our county. And we can address this by collaborative approaches in our region between public health agencies, state and local governments, CBOs, employers, and community members. Many organizations in our region, like CAUSE, like MyCOP, like Líderes Campesinas, are already working on this issue. And yeah, it's up to us to collaborate to fill the gaps and create a comprehensive approach. So hopefully this discussion today is a piece of that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jen. And if anyone would like to get in touch with Jen, we are adding Jen's contact into the chat right now. So recapping, we've looked at both on the ground realities for our youth in our region and how they experience extreme heat, and outdoor workers and their unique experiences to heat. And Jen really highlighted some of the projects that are moving California, yes, towards clean energy and electrification, but also how those projects can be considered in terms of how they can add value to addressing heat resilience. So for instance, resilience hubs, installing resilience hubs by retrofitting existing community centers to be a cooling center or to be off grid when power outages are in motion. This sort of investment allows for our already existing trusted locations and neighborhoods and our already existing facilities to be upgraded and available both through a clean energetic future for California, but also in a way that supplies respite in times of extreme heat. And this is the unique intersections of work that CEC is consistently working on. So now let's turn to the global impact of heat and the best practices that can be replicated from other places addressing heat resilience. We're honored today to have with us Kurt Schickman, the Director of Extreme Heat Resilience Initiative at the Arched Rock Foundation. Kurt focuses on increasing global resilience to rising temperatures and extreme heat by improving our early warning systems for heat, addressing the unique barriers to good heat resilience policy and implementation, and supporting innovative new ways to finance and fund it. He joined Arched Rock after 12 years leading the Global Cool Cities Alliance, a nonprofit working with over 70 cities to raise awareness of heat challenges and sharing ways to address it. And as a side note, Kurt's work took him to Uganda this week, so he is joining us from Kampala in the wee hours of the morning. So we deeply appreciate you being here with us today, despite the time zone difference. And once again, as a reminder, if you have any questions, please do drop those into the Q&A section.
Well, thank you very much, Em, for that kind introduction, and thank you all for making space for me in this discussion. Kurt Schickman, as was mentioned, I'm with the Arched Rock Resilience Center. Just a little bit about our center. We are a nonprofit based in Washington, D.C., but with a global footprint, with an overarching goal to reach 1 billion people with resilient solutions by 2030. And we focus specifically on heat. And I'll talk a little bit about why that is in a second here. So next slide, please. And thank you very much for driving the slides for me. So as you've heard, I think in much more specific and visceral detail, heat affects every aspect of our lives, our mental and physical health, but also all the urban and rural systems that we rely on to survive and thrive in today's world. And all of the things that make our world what it is: biodiversity, our agriculture system, our energy system, our health system, and all of these impacts are not felt equally. That all of these impacts further exacerbate existing inequities and injustices in our systems, both in the U.S. and globally. And so it's a huge, expensive, and broad issue. Next slide, please. That's there we go. So to highlight that in one small category, I want to show the impact on labor productivity in the U.S. Now, before you yawn at that as a sort of abstract economic term for what real impact is, what this means is take-home wages. This is what people use to pay for food, to run their air conditioner, to put away for college or a vacation. And what we find today in the U.S. is that heat in its current form is costing people $100 billion a year. And you can see on the left where that loss is concentrated. And certainly in Southern California and even in the Central Coast, some of those impacts are moderate to high. And on the right, you see the number of counties where you've got losses that are at the top of $1 million at least, or $10 million at least. And that's again, this is not economic loss. This is personal household loss. So it reverberates through our economy in broad ways, but it's also quite personal. Next slide, please. And yet, when we look at these broad impacts, it's the greatest climate killer that exists today. Over 500,000 people die every year from heat, and that's a pretty large underestimation of the number of deaths from heat. And those broad economic and broad life impacts, we see that people's perception of the risk of heat waves is not as great as other disasters. And we find that that's despite the fact that they think heat waves happen most frequently. And it's the thing they worry about the least. So what we have here is a large gap between the threat of heat and people's perception of that threat. And not just people, but the markets and how they value heat, and our politicians and how they plan for and respond to heat. And so that's really why we as a center are focused on this, and why I'm very excited to be joined by groups like CEC and others that have focused on this to change and reduce this gap for action. Next slide, please. So just a few things that we're up to at RSROC that might be relevant for folks in the Central Coast. So one of the things we try to do is address the unique challenges that heat presents to cities. And one of those challenges is just a challenge of governance. Heat is a multidisciplinary issue. You're dealing with the health department, with Parks and Rec, with transportation, with the schools, with emergency response, and a wide variety of, and that's just in the government. There's also a wide variety of community engagement that needs to happen, academic and health system engagement. And so there's a huge coordination challenge here. And so we developed a concept called the Chief Heat Officer. You can see the photos of 8 of our Chief Heat Officers at the top right-hand corner of your screen, including the Chief Heat Officer from just down the road from you in Los Angeles, Marta Segura, there in the back right. And the idea for these Chief Heat Officers is to provide that coordinating control and to create plans for heat action in their communities, but also to be a voice for this issue from a position of power. So to really highlight in their region, both the sort of local area that they're in, but also the regions around them, why this is important, and to help to highlight ways, tangible ways that we can improve our resilience to heat through their actions. We have a robust program on heat, health, and gender that revolves around highlighting the unique risks that heat presents to women, particularly the pregnant people. We work with Secretary Hillary Clinton as our global ambassador for this. And through this program, we're testing unique programs that would help women, particularly those in informal working environments in India and elsewhere, to access insurance products that when it's very hot, they receive a payment that can enhance their revenue. This can be used to hopefully offset the hours in which they're working so they can work in safer, cooler times. But it also allows them to buy things like water or more shade structures or clothing that will be more adaptable to help them be more resilient. I'll talk a little bit about the heat action platform in a moment, so I'll skip that one and focus again on gaming. So one of the really important things here is meeting people where they are, and it's not just educating from a one direction piece. It's finding ways to meet people in the communities that they engage with. And the gaming community is one of those powerful places globally. About 3.2 billion people play games every day, and that's across all continents in every country. And it's about a 50-50 split in terms of male and female participation. So these are rich spaces for us to help include messages around resilience, messages around how to respond and be prepared in ways that aren't just educational, but are built into an entertainment and sort of gameplay type experience. And it's also a way for us to work with political leaders at all levels to help them viscerally see through VR and AR experiences the impact of their decisions, and to create these shared experiences amongst them, which often in many cases wouldn't already exist, so that they can work together towards resilience and heat policy action. And I'll talk about the other two, the Extreme Heat Resilience Alliance and the health-based warning systems here in just a second. So we can skip to the next slide, please. So the first is this idea of the Extreme Heat Resilience Alliance. As I've mentioned before, heat is a broad spectrum, multidisciplinary challenge, and it requires expertise from across the board. It requires community experts. It requires people that understand public health and disaster response, engineers and architects, climate scientists, meteorologists, and many, many others in between. And so what we've attempted to do over the years is create an alliance that can bring those groups together, all of which are focused on heat in some specific way, to learn from each other and to find ways to work together to support the practitioners on the ground that are really trying to make this change in their communities. You may notice in the bottom left, a familiar logo. We're very excited to be soon announcing the addition of the Community Environmental Council in ERA, to learn from you all and what you do, and also to share what we've learned in our work on this. Next slide, please. So this is a tool that we've developed with ERA members and with other partners around the world, including the UN Environment Program and a group called RMI. And the idea here was, there are a wide variety of different ways to engage this issue of heat, but we have seen from all those different cities and communities, there are certain through lines that we can pick out and create a roadmap for how to do good, inclusive planning that starts with understanding where we have where we have challenges and vulnerabilities in our communities. How do we bring the right people and all the people we can to the table to create a co-produced, inclusive plan that includes solutions and policies that are relevant to the places and the needs of the communities that they're going to serve? And how do we implement those and measure the performance of that plan so that it can be improved and so that the political will around it can be persistent over time? This is our heat action platform, and there's a QR code here that you can click to see more about this. But this is how we have been engaging with cities, with communities, with national governments, with state governments on getting started on this question. And you can start from the beginning and move to the end, or just pick out individual modules where it's needed. But this has been the sort of engagement tool we've used to help city practitioners plan for this. But I would also say this has been a tool for community organizers who are working to move policy in their communities to show their political leaders that there are ways forward. These are tools not just for those that have to develop the policy, but for those that are demanding the policy. Next slide, please. And just some resources that may be of value to you. One of the things we've tried to do is create some off-the-shelf resources on our website called the Heat Season Campaign. It's available in a variety of languages, and we add more all the time. These might be a great fit for a poster in schools. We've used them, or we've seen them used in bus shelters and other outdoor areas. And they're really just very simple, or social media posts and things like that, but they're very simple, easy to adapt, free to use resources to help quickly raise awareness around heat in your community, both the challenge of heat, but also specific actions you can take. As Jennifer mentioned in her presentation, there are resources that really walk through the things that you can do specifically to keep yourself safe. So they're a great resource if you're looking for something quick to put out this summer as the season heats up in your area. Next slide, please. And while that's coming up, I don't see it on my screen yet. The other thing I work on is developing health-based warning systems for heat. So we can incorporate the impact of local people's health in the way we warn about heat. Right now, the way we warn people about heat through the Weather Service is simply using the weather. It's high temperature, and in some cases, high temperature and humidity. That actually isn't a great indicator of dangerous weather, and for a variety of reasons. The first is that high temperature isn't always what kills you. It's the overnight temperature that can be the most dangerous when it doesn't go down enough and let people reset their systems. The other thing is, as was mentioned before, there are a variety of communities that we deal with that are very vulnerable to heat, but warnings are general in nature. So by the time a weather service calls a warning, it's already very dangerous for some populations. And so a warning system that takes into account the local health response to weather in their community will trigger earlier and allow for people to take the actions they need to take in advance of that. We've launched this system formally in Seville in Spain, where we also name heat waves. And we've seen that actually change people's behavior in a measurable way. And we have this system operating in Greece, where we're partnered with the International Red Cross to trigger funds to the local Red Cross for response in advance of heat waves. Rather than after disasters, we're able to get funding out to the local Red Cross to check on people, to provide water in advance of the heat coming to help people stay safer. As it happens, we also have developed this system in a pilot form or a demonstration form in Los Angeles, and that's what you're seeing on the screen here. So those green bars are individual days in the forecast from tomorrow all the way out to, well, in this case, not tomorrow, but it would be from tomorrow at the top out 5 days. And you can see how dangerous the day will be, not just based on the temperature, but based on the impact that temperature and those weather conditions will have on people in not just LA overall, but in three distinct sort of climate zones of Los Angeles. In California right now, you've got, last year you passed legislation that would require health-based warning systems to be developed by the California EPA. This is one way this could work. There will be many that will be considered, but I would encourage you to be involved in that, because this is a critically important way for us to help our communities be better prepared and to understand the risk of heat. And through that, of preparedness and awareness, we will be saving, people will be able to save their own lives, and we won't need as many cooling centers. We won't need as many changes to our routine. We will be able to actually build in that preparedness in a way we can't right now. So I will leave it there. Thank you for, and I look forward to the discussion, and thank you for bearing with my technical challenges from half a world away. It was great to be with you.
Thank you so much, Kurt. It is such an amazing experience to really look towards these cities and places who are further along in their heat resilience journey, and to know that as partners with the Extreme Heat Regional Alliance, Extreme Heat Resilience Alliance, CEC can do its best to bridge access to these strategies and resources with our regional organizations here on the Central Coast. And we could really see that some of these major policies and actions that California can take can address heat. I think that's one of the most important pieces of information I'm feeling today, listening to these panelists and the work that we're doing, is knowing that although heat is the deadliest climate impact, it's also a climate impact that together we can become resilient to, and we can actually address and solve in our lifetime and now through actions that we collectively can take individually, at government agency levels, as well as in collaborative levels with community-based organizations. So thank you for that. So now it's time to shift to our question and answer portion of the webinar. We'll be fielding questions that you've asked in the Q&A box. And some of these questions have been answered, so we'll lift some of those answers up for the recording and for all of us to reflect upon. And we'll also address some of the questions live here. I might call on some of our panelists if needed. So continue to place your questions in the Q&A, and we'll start responding to those. So just lifting up a question from Margaret around, are there any cooling centers in or near Carpinteria, which is in southern Santa Barbara County? So previous to this webinar, CEC staff actually took some time to do our own aggregation of cooling centers in our region. So you can quickly access that at cec.pub/cooling centers. This is just a quick online resource of cooling centers we pulled together from 2022 information. So we hope to update this in 2023. Additionally, through our county public health departments, they should have access to cooling centers on their websites. And we'll also put into a chat a larger link that takes you to a California-wide cooling centers page. So another question is, again, how can I access cooling centers in my community neighborhood? So this larger cpuc.ca.gov, this is a California-wide website that can take you to places to address cooling centers. And as we learned from last year's heat wave in September, one of the biggest challenges with the establishment of cooling centers is addressing transportation to cooling centers. And also the fact that they might be placed in areas or environments that may not be comfortable or accessible to all people. So we really need to consider in the work that we're doing region-wide to come up with holistic solutions that address approaching shading, approaching cooling our households, cooling neighborhood centers and helping people get to cooling centers more efficiently. And that's something we really want to advocate for this year. And Margaret also pointed out a really good question and point of advocacy, which is, are there plans underway for cooling centers where elderly people can go during the night to sleep during heat waves? And so this is a really great point. And although we don't have an answer right now, this is a really great piece of feedback that we could take to our public health partners. Also, there were a couple questions from Aaron and Nancy related to resilience hubs. So addressing Aaron's question first, how does a resilience hub get off grid, get its off-grid power? The California state agencies, including our Office of Planning and Research with the Governors Association and Strategic Growth Council, have invested over $200 million in implementation dollars to retrofit existing community centers with enough solar and battery storage to provide off-grid power during power outages for the geographic region of the neighborhood that they serve. So to Nancy's point, how many people can a resilience hub fit? It's really according to each neighborhood. So resilience hubs are meant to be community-led, community-designed, and already existing community centers or community locations. So hopefully our goal is to deploy as many resilience hubs as possible through our region to serve as many separate neighborhoods. Now, although we couldn't answer all the questions during the time that we have left today, we encourage you to continue to reach out to us, and we will be sending resources following this webinar. We do appreciate that, and we really want to thank all of y'all for all of your great questions. So please take a moment now and share with us in the chat, what are your biggest takeaways from today? And as you share that, I'd like to turn it back to our CEO, Sigrid, for a round of thank yous.
That was just really fantastic. Thank you all. Those stories were very powerful. The data that was shared there was also very interesting. I think this is going to help the Community Environmental Council as we work on our extreme heat planning and putting together that project. So thank you, and thank you, Em. Just want to say that free events like this are just one of the ways in which the Community Environmental Council works to advance regional and equitable solutions to the climate crisis. And events like this are made possible because of donations from individuals like you. So as you consider your yearly investments, no matter the amount, we hope you will consider a gift to our work. You can visit the QR code on the screen or visit us at cecsb.org/donate. We are one of only a handful of nonprofits in Santa Barbara County that hold the highest or some of the highest ratings possible from Charity Navigator and GuideStar. And as I mentioned earlier, we will be compiling a recording of this session and contact info for today's presenters and other resources that we shared. And we will be getting that out in the next couple of days, as long as information about upcoming events. And I have one very exciting event to share with you right now. Some of you may be have been hearing about this, but we will be conducting the grand opening and ribbon cutting of our CEC's new environmental hub. This is a 10,000 square foot state-of-the-art collaborative space at 1219 State Street in Santa Barbara. It's designed to be an epicenter for community activism, education, entrepreneurship, media, and art. So the ribbon cutting will be on Thursday, July 6th. The open house and ribbon cutting starting at 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. will be part of Santa Barbara Downtown's first Thursday Art Walk. The grand opening will feature a art installation, Return of the Western Monarch Butterfly, by resident artist Elizabeth Weber, who joined us here this evening. I'm very excited about that. So please, I invite you to join us to celebrate this important milestone in bringing climate action right onto State Street in the heart of the community of Santa Barbara. Thank you again for everyone for tuning into the webinar series. If you haven't already, please join our newsletter and engage with us on your favorite social media channel. The QR code here will lead you to many ways that you can get involved to take action in CEC's work. And this brings our webinar to a close. We'll leave up this final slide for a minute longer so you can scan the QR code and get the info to connect with us on socials. Again, we'll see. Check your mailboxes for the resources from tonight. Thank you to our presenters. Thank you for everyone for joining us. Have a good evening.